All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas, and I do mostly educational material on this channel. Um, and today is the 93rd video on the reciprocal system of theory, which is a theory of everything derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. And he died back in 1990. We're taking a close look at his final book that actually came out posthumously in 1995 called Beyond Space and Time. This book was his attempt to explain metaphysics, philosophy, psychology, religion, and it was a departure from his earlier books, which were all on hard sciences such as chemistry and astronomy and physics. And the basic logic behind Larson's system is that he believed that the universe was not made out of matter, it was not made out of energy, but it was made out of motion. Motion, a universe of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are basically, they came together in motion. There was no space or time except as they formed in motion. So any type of relationship between space and time was motion. All physical phenomena basically could be described strictly in terms of motion, in terms of space and time. Space and time both were multidimensional, 3 or more dimensions, and they both flowed or progressed. So, speed is space over time. It turns out that energy is time over space. Matter is time to the 3rd power over space to the 3rd power. Pressure is time over space to the 4th power. Impulse is time to the 2nd power over space. Capacitance is space to the 3rd power over time, and so on and so forth. And that works as a great check because you can go over the classical, physics and look at all the equations and substitute the space-time, components of them, and you can figure out whether their equations make sense or not. Now, so space and time are reciprocals of each other. They are both multidimensional, they both flow or progress, and they are both quantized, meaning that there is a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, space over time, is speed. 1 unit of space over 1 unit of time is the speed of light. The speed of light is the neutral point or the midpoint or the null point or the origin of the universe of motion. Whereas in Einstein's universe, the speed of light was the maximum speed. For Larson, the speed of light is just the boundary between 2 separate universes, one of which is going faster than the speed of light. The other is the one that we're familiar with, moving slower than the speed of light. He calls that sector 1, or the material sector. And sector 2, or the cosmic sector, is the half that's moving faster than the speed of light. Sector 1 grows by aggregation, chemical bonding, and so on, up until its most complex level, which is DNA, containing several billion atoms per molecule. And at that point becomes eligible to be taken control of by a sector 2 entity. This is a difficult explanation, but it has to do with what Larson calls the interregional ratio. And it's basically how much you lose in the translation crossing from one sector of the universe to another. And it basically takes 2.1 billion atoms in the material sector to balance out 1 atom in the cosmic sector. And so when a material and cosmic sector unit link up like that, Larson calls that the life unit. And the life unit also then develops or evolves over time and up until its most complex level, which Larson calls the intelligent human being. And that intelligent human being then becomes eligible to be controlled overall by a metaphysical unit, or a unit from what Larson calls Sector 3. Other people might have called it God or Spirit or the Numinous. That is beyond space and time, or independent of space and time, or maybe we were pointing at it earlier when we were talking about the origin, that light, the speed of light is the origin. And anyway, that Sector 3 unit is motivates us, it communicates with us, and through intuition, revelation, insight, ESP, these are all communications from Sector 3. The answers that we get from Sector 3 are correct. Our ability to translate them correctly is limited. But those communications are targeted toward an ethical life, or a life of good behavior, whereas the Sector 2 control, the life part of it, is directed toward survival. So sometimes survival and ethics are in conflict, and that's where the human being has to make the choice between the two. It's only a choice between two. There's no middle ground. You either choose good or evil. Evil in this case being the animal life survival impulse. Sometimes they do work together as well. So, life isn't all bad, but there are some points where it has to take a back seat to the ethical behavior. Okay, now we are in chapter 23 of Larson's book, Beyond Space and Time, which is all on metaphysics. It's all on about Sector 3. And this chapter is called Religion Re-Examined. And he's talking about how, human beings have gotten intuitions about things over the years, and many of them have been put into biblical or other ancient texts, but that there is also a need to winnow out the kind of the Sector 3 components of language from the Sector 2 components of religion. From the Sector 2 components of religion, which are kind of like the ritual and the superficial aspects of religion. And we will let Larson take over right here toward the beginning, middle of the chapter. The creation issue is one of the major bones of contention in the American religious scene at the moment. The battle is centered on the question of biological evolution, the contention of the creation forces being that evolution is incompatible with the religious account of the creation of the earth. The logic of this position is rather difficult to grasp. Just why the creation of an evolutionary universe in which biological evolution was one of the things created should be objectionable to those who champion the idea of creation is puzzling to a neutral observer. It is even more difficult to understand when we examine the biblical account of creation, on which the objections to evolution are purported to be based. And we find, as we did in chapter 10, that it portrays the creation as sequential and therefore, by implication, evolutionary. Some of the confusion obviously results from reading things into the creation account that are not actually there. And now he's quoting Titus, who's saying, according to this creation view, all living species were created at one time and place. And Larson says, but this is not the way the story is written. It describes the creation as a sequence of events taking place over a period of time, and with one minor exception, puts them all, including the pre-evolutionary events, in the proper order. There is, it is true, considerable controversy as to how long a period of time is implied by the wording of the creation story. The meaning of the language used in an account such as this, written long ago under circumstances much different from those that now exist, cannot be understood unless the general level of knowledge and the manner of expression of thought prevailing at that time and place are taken into consideration. Present-day science finds that millions of years were required for each of the major evolutionary stages, and billions of years for the events that preceded the origin of life on Earth. The early Hebrews were not prepared to think in terms of long intervals of this nature, even if the revelations contained all of the information. And it was therefore the revelations really being Sector 3 communications. It was, and back to Larson, it was therefore necessary for the author of the Genesis account to use some expression to which an indefinite, indicated an indefinite period of time. He chose a word which has been translated as day. Obviously, he did not mean an Earth day, even though the words morning and evening are employed in elaborating the account. There was no Earth during the first days of the creation story. It follows that the author could not have used the word day in the sense of the period of the Earth's rotation on its axis, the sense in which the creationists are interpreting it. He must have used it in a different sense. His use of the terms morning and evening in describing the events of the days before there was any morning or evening in the specific sense shows definitely that the language was intended to be interpreted broadly rather than specifically. The logical conclusion is that he used these terms in the general significance that has been attached to them throughout recorded history, even in our day, as indicated in the following definitions taken from Standard Dictionary. Morning, the first or early part of anything. Evening, any later period of time of decline, as in the evening of this life, of his life. Day, a period of time, age or era, as in days of old. This present work has not uncovered enough evidence to determine as a matter of scientific fact whether the universe was brought into being by an act of creation. We find the biblical account of the origin of the earth and of biological life to be an authentic revelation insofar as it is an account of what happened is concerned, subject to the limitations of the recipient's knowledge of physical phenomena and processes. But the investigation has thus far located nothing that would either verify or disprove any religious assertion as to the cause of what happened. Similarly, we have confirmed the existence of metaphysical agencies, but we have not determined whether one or more of these agencies created the universe, or even whether such a thing as creation is possible. As matters now stand, therefore, both the reciprocal system and the conventional science are silent on the creation issue. Anyone who feels that he should arrive at a definite conclusion on the subject will have to determine whether he can accept on faith some one of the many pronouncements as to the origin of the universe that have been made by various religious bodies. Creation is by no means the only controversial metaphysical question on which this first scientific expedition into the region beyond space and time fails to shed much light. While this investigation has definitely established the most important fact, the reality of metaphysical existence, it has not produced much information as to the nature and characteristics of the existences, other than ethical. a subject on which the religions have a great deal to say, and say it in a great many different and contradictory ways. However, the verification of the basic religious doctrines that has been accomplished is a big step forward. There are also some broad general principles underlying both science and religion that can now be regarded as firmly based, as it is now clear that the almost universal acceptance of these principles is evidence that they have been received by a process of intuitive insight, and their validity can be tested by application of the criteria that have been developed for judging the products of insight and revelation. All this definitely confirms Hawking's assertion that that religion's basis is more substantial and less vulnerable than the fabric of speculative ideas in which it seems to consist. The question now arises as to whether a scientist can logically identify himself with any particular organized religion, with a specific set of those speculative ideas, without doing violence to his scientific reliance upon the processes of reason, or whether his reconciliation with religion is confined to agreement on generalities. Here, some detailed consideration will be necessary. It is evident, to begin with, that a scientist, as a scientist, cannot accept all of the official doctrines of any of the organized religions. Many thoughtful individuals have, in fact, concluded that the unacceptable portions constitute so large a proportion of the whole that these organized religious bodies must be rejected summarily, such as Percival Bridgman, who once asserted that acceptance of any of the traditional or conventional religions seems to many incompatible with plain, decent intellectual honesty. Another, Paul Dirac, takes a similar stand. If we are honest, and scientists have to be, we must admit that religion is a jumble of false assertions with no basis in reality. And Arthur Koestler says much the same by saying, to the inquiring intellect, the established churches become venerable anachronisms, though still capable of giving sporadic uplift to a diminishing number of individuals at the price of splitting his mind into incompatible halves. Our analysis indicates, however, that these extreme views are not justified. It is true that the analysis does show that a very large part of the information purported to be received through revelation, insight, or equivalent means is erroneous, in whole or in part, and religious beliefs based on such information are spurious. Fully prepared recipients of intersector communications are extremely rare, and even though the message itself may be complete and correct, the interpretation that it is given by the recipient may be completely wrong. It is also true that the greater part of the doctrine of any of the religions of today consists of additions to or interpretations of the original revelations, and there is considerable doubt as to whether the originators of this additional material were qualified to perceive and to understand the full effect of the additions on the revealed information. For centuries, men had been indoctrinated in a complex system of myths, built on what had originally been a simple religion, but had, this is a quote from Vannevar Bush. For centuries, men had been indoctrinated in a complex system of myths, built on what had originally been a simple religion, but had been embroidered through the years by tradition and the human tendency to elaborate and ornament. And now he's citing the theologian E.A. Burt. Every great religion, when it spreads widely, becomes corrupted, and it is necessary to distinguish between the insights of the pioneers who founded it and the popular superstitions which arise through mingling their teachings with persistent primitive notions, or through interpreting their basic ideas so as to satisfy childish demands on the part of their followers. So, back to Larson. In this connection, it is significant that many, probably most, of the highly controversial religious tenets belong to this category of additions and interpretations rather than being part of the original doctrine. Some of the most controversial of all are assertions about the founder of the religion rather than about his teachings. And these are especially likely to become highly emotional issues. The particular target of ecclesiastical vindictiveness has always been the heretic, the individual who differs with the original doctrine in no more than a few of these very controversial points, perhaps only one, and a minor one at that. The infidel or atheist is attacked verbally or, where circumstances permit, physically, but not with the same fervor that characterizes the assault upon the heretic. Meanwhile, the items included in this category of controversial additions and interpretations are being revised, even in the most inflexible and immovable religious organizations. The heresies for which men are imprisoned or executed in one era often become perfectly respectable beliefs a few centuries later. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'll take over with Larson here starting tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.